The bread hits my face before I see who throws it. Stale, hard enough to bruise. Laughter erupts around the marketplace as I stumble backward, my basket of laundry scattering across the muddy ground. I don't look up. Looking up only makes it worse. My fingers tremble as I gather the soiled clothes, knowing I'll be beaten for returning them dirty. The scars on my hands catch the morning light, twisted ribbons of white tissue that mark me as cursed, as broken, as less than nothing in the Silver Moon Pack's rigid hierarchy. A boot connects with my ribs, and I curl instinctively, protecting my face even though the damage there was done long ago. 3 jagged scars run from my left temple down to my jaw, a permanent reminder of the night everything changed. The night my parents died and I became the Pack's favorite target for cruelty. Every Omega knows their place in our world, but I exist somewhere below even that, in a category reserved for those marked by tragedy and misfortune. The Pack believes my scars are punishment from the moon goddess herself, that whatever happened to me as a child was divine judgment for some unknowable sin. They whisper that I'm cursed, that touching me brings bad luck, that my very presence pollutes the sacred bonds that hold Packs together. I've learned to make myself invisible, to move through shadows, to accept every insult and injury without complaint, because complaint only invites worse. My days blur together in endless cycles of servitude, cleaning the pack house from dawn until my fingers bleed, washing clothes in the freezing river until my hands go numb, scrubbing floors while wolves step over me as though I'm part of the furniture. At night, I sleep in a corner of the storage shed, curled around the only possession I have left from my parents, a small wooden carving of a wolf, howling at the moon. I don't remember their faces anymore, just fragments of warmth and safety that feel like dreams now. The announcement comes on a Tuesday, delivered by pack runners who seem to materialize from nowhere, their voices carrying the weight of absolute authority. Every unmated Omega between 18 and 25 is commanded to present themselves at the capital for the King's selection ceremony. The Alpha King, Kalen Blackthorn, has decided it's time to choose his queen, and tradition demands he consider Omegas from every pack in the kingdom. The news sends the pack house into chaos. Eligible Omegas preen and panic in equal measure, commissioning new dresses and practicing their curtsies while their families calculate political advantages and alliance possibilities. I watch from the corners as always, expecting nothing, until Beta Marcus grabs my arm with enough force to leave new bruises atop old ones. He informs me with undisguised disgust that I'll be attending as well. Not as a candidate, of course, but as a servant to the pack's actual contenders. Someone needs to carry their bags, fix their hair, clean up their messes. Someone disposable. If you're enjoying this story of transformation and hidden power, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you think will happen when Alara meets the Alpha King. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, because this journey is just beginning. The journey to the capital takes 3 days by carriage. 3 days of being crammed into the servants' compartment with barely enough room to breathe, while the Omega candidates ride in cushioned luxury above. We stop each night at way stations where I'm expected to prepare meals, tend to the others' needs, and sleep on the ground outside regardless of weather. By the time we reach the towering gates of Shadowcrest, the capital city that houses the royal palace, I'm exhausted beyond measure, my body aching from fresh injuries and old scars pulling tight across my back. The palace itself defies description, a massive structure of black stone and silver, accents that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. Towers pierce the sky like claws, and everywhere I look, I see guards in the king's crimson and black, their eyes cold and assessing as they watch the steady stream of packs arriving for the ceremony. The selection will take place over a week, we're told, a series of events designed to test the candidate's grace, intelligence, and worthiness to stand beside the most powerful alpha in the known world. I hear whispers about King Kalen everywhere, stories that make even brave wolves lower their voices. They say he took the throne at 19, after his entire family was slaughtered in a coup, that he crushed the rebellion with such ruthless efficiency that neighboring kingdoms still speak of it in hushed tones. They say he's never smiled, never shown mercy, never displayed any emotion beyond cold calculation and controlled rage. They say his eyes are silver, like moonlight on steel, and that one look from him can make even alphas submit. They say he's waiting for his true mate, but that he'll choose based on political advantage if the mate bond doesn't appear, because kings don't have the luxury of waiting for destiny. I'm assigned to the servants' quarters in the palace's lowest level, a warren of stone corridors and cramped rooms that house the invisible workforce keeping this massive operation running. My specific duty is serving the Silver Moon Pack's 3 Omega candidates, which means enduring their constant verbal abuse while helping them prepare for each event. The first competition is a formal ball where candidates will be presented to the king one by one. I spend hours lacing corsets, pinning hair, and listening to excited chatter about what it will feel like to catch the king's attention. None of them acknowledge me, except to snap orders or criticize my clumsiness. When they finally depart in a cloud of expensive perfume and anxious energy, I collapse onto my thin mattress, every muscle. Screaming for rest I won't get because I'm expected to attend the ball as well, to hover in the shadows ready to fix any wardrobe malfunctions or attend to any needs. The ballroom is the most magnificent space I've ever seen, all soaring ceilings and glittering chandeliers, walls lined with mirrors that multiply the crowd into infinity. Hundreds of wolves pack the space, alphas and betas in formal dress, omegas in gowns that cost more than I'll earn in a lifetime. I press myself against the far wall near the servants' entrance, making myself as small as possible while trying not to stare at the opulence surrounding me. The air itself feels charged with anticipation, with the weight of hundreds of hearts hoping for a miracle, for the chance to become queen and escape whatever circumstances currently bind them. Music plays from an orchestra I can't see, something classical and haunting that makes my chest ache with nameless longing. Then the crowd falls silent, a wave of submission, rolling through the room so powerful I feel it in my bones despite having no rank to enforce it. The Alpha King enters from the far end of the ballroom, and even from this distance I feel the impact of his presence like a physical force. He's tall, broader than any wolf I've seen, moving with the deadly grace of a born predator. His formal attire is all black except for the crimson sash denoting his rank, and his dark hair is pulled back to reveal a face that could have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and harsh beauty. But it's his eyes that make my breath catch, silver and ancient, and completely devoid of warmth, scanning the crowd with the detached interest of someone who expects nothing and is rarely surprised. He takes his place on the raised dais at the room's center, settling into his throne with the casual arrogance of someone who's never questioned his right to rule. The presentations begin, each Omega climbing the dais steps to be introduced, to perform their rehearsed curtsy, to hope desperately for some sign of recognition or interest. The king's expression never changes. Not for the breathtaking Beta's daughter from Moonshadow Pack. Not for the brilliant scholar from River Run. Not for any of the carefully groomed and politically connected candidates who represent their pack's best offerings. I watch from my corner, simultaneously fascinated and horrified by this display of packaged femininity and desperate ambition. Part of me, the part I try to bury deep, wonders what it would feel like to be seen, to be valued, to stand in light instead of shadows. The thought is so absurd I almost laugh, because wolves like me don't dream about kings and thrones. We dream about surviving another day, about having enough to eat, about maybe someday being treated with basic dignity. The presentations continue for what feels like hours, the king's boredom becoming increasingly apparent despite his controlled expression. Then something shifts in the room's energy, a ripple of confusion and whispered questions. I glance toward the commotion and see one of the Silver Moon candidates, the Beta's daughter Lyanna, gesturing frantically toward me. My stomach drops because I know that gesture. Know what it means when wolves like her summon wolves like me. I navigate through the crowd, keeping my head down, my scars burning with shame as nobles step back to avoid accidental contact with me. When I reach Lyanna, she's in a full panic, whispering urgently that the clasp on her dress has broken, and she needs me to fix it immediately before her turn to be presented. I examine the damage and realize this will require needle and thread, supplies that are back in the servants' quarters. I tell her I need to retrieve my sewing kit, but she grabs my wrist hard enough to make me gasp, insisting I find something here, now, before she's called forward. The panic in her eyes is real despite her cruelty, because this is her one chance to escape an arranged marriage to an alpha 3 times her age. I look around desperately and spot a serving station with napkins held by decorative pins. It's not ideal, but it might work as a temporary solution. I'm reaching for one of the pins when I hear the herald's voice boom across the ballroom. His Majesty requests the presence of all attendees, including servants and guards, to step forward for the traditional blessing ceremony. The announcement is unusual enough that confused murmurs ripple through the crowd. But no one questions a direct command from the king. I feel the blood drain from my face, because stepping forward means being seen, being exposed, putting my scarred face on display for hundreds of wolves who will react with disgust or pity, or both. But disobedience isn't an option. Not here. Not with the king's guards already moving through the crowd to ensure compliance. I move with the other servants toward the center of the room, keeping my head down and my hair falling, forward to hide as much of my face as possible. We arrange ourselves in groups by function, and I end up near the front of the servants section purely by accident of timing. The blessing ceremony is an old tradition, something about the king acknowledging all those who serve the kingdom in various capacities. It should be quick and painless, just a formal gesture before the ball continues. The king rises from his throne and begins to descend the dais steps, his movements slow and deliberate. He'll walk among the groups, we're told, offering a nod of recognition to each section. It's meant to be symbolic, a reminder that even kings rely on the support of those beneath them. I focus on my breathing, on staying calm, on getting through this moment so I can return to invisibility. The king moves through the alphas first, his presence making even the proudest among them lower their eyes. Then the betas, then the candidates who have already been presented. He's getting closer and I can feel the power radiating from him. An alpha command so strong, it makes my wolf whimper in instinctive submission. My wolf, who rarely shows herself anymore, suddenly surges to the surface with unexpected strength. She's never done this before, never pushed forward without reason, and I struggle to maintain control as she practically claws at my consciousness, demanding attention. Then the king reaches the servants section, and everything changes. He takes one step toward our group and stops, completely, his entire body going rigid. The silence in the ballroom becomes absolute. Hundreds of wolves holding their breath as they watch their king freeze mid-step, like he's been turned to stone. His head turns slowly, those silver eyes scanning our group with sudden fierce intensity, and I realize with growing horror that he's searching for something, or someone. I press back instinctively, trying to disappear into the crowd, but there's nowhere to go. His eyes lock onto mine, and the world explodes. It's not a physical sensation, but it might as well be. This sudden, overwhelming awareness of connection, of recognition, of a bond snapping into place with enough force to drive me to my knees. The mate bond. Impossible, unthinkable, but undeniable. Every cell in my body screams with recognition, with belonging, with the absolute certainty that this male, this king, is mine in ways that transcend reason or logic. The king's face transforms, shock bleeding through his careful control, for just an instant before training reasserts itself, but his eyes never leave mine, and I see something in them that terrifies me more than anger or disgust could. I see hunger. I see possession. I see a predator who has just found what he didn't know he was hunting. He moves toward me with purpose now, the crowd parting before him like water, their shocked whispers building into a roar I barely process. I want to run, to hide, to deny what's happening, but I'm frozen in place by the weight of his stare and the bond pulling tight between us like an invisible chain. He stops directly in front of me, so close I can feel the heat radiating from his body, can smell cedarwood and night air, and something uniquely him that makes my wolf howl with need. His hand rises slowly, giving me time to flee if I choose, but I'm paralyzed by confusion and terror, and a desperate hope I don't dare acknowledge. His fingers touch my chin, tilting my face up with surprising gentleness despite the calluses I feel on his skin. For the first time in years, someone is looking directly at me, seeing the scars that mark me as other, as damaged, as unworthy. I wait for the inevitable recoil, for disgust to cloud his eyes, for him to reject this bond as the cosmic mistake it must be. Instead, his thumb traces the largest scar on my cheek with something that might be reverence, his silver eyes searching mine with an intensity that makes me forget how to breathe. When he speaks, his voice is low and rough, meant only for me, despite the hundreds listening. "What is your name?" The question is simple, but the way he asks it makes it feel like the most important thing anyone has ever said to me. My voice comes out barely above a whisper, broken from years of learning not to speak unless absolutely necessary. "Alara." He repeats it like he's tasting the syllables, like he's committing them to memory, and something fierce and possessive flashes in his eyes. Then, while the entire ballroom watches in stunned silence, the Alpha King does something no one could have predicted. He lowers himself to one knee before me, his hand still cradling my face, his eyes never leaving mine. The gesture is so shocking, so unprecedented that gasps echo through the room. A king kneeling to anyone is unheard of, but kneeling to a scarred Omega servant is beyond comprehension. Yet here he is, this powerful male, who commands absolute obedience from thousands, bowing before me in acknowledgement of a bond he can't deny any more than I can. Are you as shocked as Alara right now? Drop a comment letting me know what you think the king will do next, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story is about to get even more intense. What happens when destiny chooses the most unlikely queen imaginable? His voice rings out across the silent ballroom, clear and commanding, and absolutely certain. I, Kaelin Blackthorn, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, recognize this woman as my true mate, gifted by the moon goddess herself. She is under my protection from this moment forward, and any who would harm her will answer to me personally. The declaration should feel triumphant, but instead it feels like a cage snapping shut, because I know what comes next. I know how wolves react to threats against the natural order, and a scarred servant as queen is the greatest threat imaginable to generations of tradition and hierarchy. The ballroom erupts into chaos, voices rising in protest and disbelief, nobles shouting objections while candidates who just lost their chance at the throne wail in disappointment. Through it all, the king remains kneeling, his eyes locked on mine, waiting for something I don't understand, until I realize he's giving me a choice. He won't force this bond, despite his power to do exactly that. He's waiting for my acceptance, my acknowledgement, my consent to the path he's offering. The path that leads to either salvation or destruction. I can't tell which. My wolf surges forward again, desperate and demanding, crying out for our mate with a ferocity that shocks me. She's been silent for so long, beaten down by years of abuse and rejection, that I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to have her fight for something. But she's fighting now, clawing at my control, begging me to accept this gift the moon goddess has somehow deemed us worthy of receiving. My human side is less certain, remembering every time hope led to greater pain. Every moment trust was rewarded with betrayal. But looking into the king's eyes, I see something that makes me take the most terrifying risk of my life. I see truth. I see recognition. I see someone who understands what it means to wear scars others can't see. My hand rises shakily to cover his where it still cups my face, and I manage a tiny nod. It's barely perceptible, but it's enough. Something fierce and triumphant blazes in his expression, and he rises smoothly, pulling me to my feet with him, tucking me against his side with a possessiveness that should frighten me, but instead feels like shelter. He turns to face the still protesting crowd, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade through silk. The mate bond is sacred and unchallengeable. Any who question the moon goddess's choice question the very foundation of our society. My queen has been chosen, and this matter is not open for debate or discussion. The selection ceremony is concluded. You are all dismissed. The command in his tone makes even the most rebellious nobles snap their mouths shut, though I can see rage and resentment burning in countless eyes. The king doesn't seem to notice or care, his attention entirely focused on me as he begins leading me toward the exit. The crowd parts before us, wolves pressing back against walls to avoid proximity, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust to calculation as they process how this development might affect their political positions. I catch sight of Leanna and the other Silver Moon candidates, their faces twisted with jealousy and fury that the cursed servant they've tormented for years is suddenly untouchable. Beta Marcus looks like he might have a stroke, his carefully laid plans for alliance through one of his candidates' selection completely shattered. We pass them all in silence, the king's hand firm on my lower back, his presence a shield against the hostility rolling off the crowd in waves. He leads me through corridors I've never seen, parts of. The palace reserved for royalty and high-ranking officials, all polished marble and priceless artwork and luxury that makes my head spin. Guards fall into step behind us but maintain a respectful distance, their expressions carefully neutral, though I catch glances of curiosity and shock when they think we're not looking. We climb a grand staircase that seems to go on forever, each step taking us further from the world I know, and deeper into one I have no preparation for navigating. Finally, we reach a set of massive double doors guarded by two stone-faced warriors who open them immediately at our approach. The king guides me inside, and the doors close behind us, with a definitive sound that makes me flinch. We're alone for the first time, and the reality of the situation crashes over me with enough force to make my knees buckle. The king catches me before I can fall, his arms steady and surprisingly gentle as he guides me to a plush sofa near an enormous fireplace. The room around us is clearly his personal quarters, all dark wood and rich fabrics and the scent of him concentrated enough to make my head fuzzy. He doesn't release me immediately, instead studying my face with an intensity that makes me want to hide. His hand comes up again to trace my scars, and I can't stop the flinch this time. Can't hide the ingrained reaction to having someone's attention focused on my damage. He notices. Of course he notices. And something dark and furious flashes through his expression, before he controls it. When he speaks, his voice is softer than before, lacking the commanding edge he used in the ballroom. "Who did this to you?" The question catches me off guard because I expected many things but not concern, not anger on my behalf, not the implication that someone will be held accountable for old injuries. I don't know how to answer, don't know where to even begin explaining the complicated truth that I don't remember the attack itself. Only waking up covered in blood with my parents dead, and these marks carved into my skin. The king waits patiently, his thumb stroking small circles on my shoulder in a gesture that might be meant as comfort, but mostly just makes me hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. Finally, I managed to speak, my voice rusty and uncertain. I don't know. I was 6. There was an attack on my family's cabin. My parents died. I survived but barely, and with these, I gesture vaguely at my face and arms, at the visible evidence of whatever horror unfolded that night. The king's expression darkens further, and I see his jaw clench, see violence simmering just beneath his controlled surface. But his touch remains gentle, almost reverent, as he continues tracing the paths of damaged tissue across my skin. These are not marks of shame. They are proof of survival, of strength beyond measure. You were 6 years old and you lived through something that should have killed you. That makes you a warrior, not a victim. The words are said with such conviction that for a moment I almost believe them, almost let myself see the scars as something other than the curse mark they've always been. But years of conditioning aren't erased by pretty words, no matter how sincerely delivered. I pull back slightly, needing distance, needing to think clearly without the bond clouding my judgment. The king allows it, though I see reluctance in his eyes, see his wolf fighting the instinct to keep his mate close and protected. I force myself to meet his gaze directly, to ask the question that's been burning in my mind since the moment the bond snapped into place. Why did you kneel? In front of everyone? He considers the question for a long moment, his silver eyes never leaving mine. And when he answers, I hear absolute truth in every word. Because you expected rejection. Because you've been taught that you are less than others, unworthy of respect or consideration. because I will not begin our bond by reinforcing those lies. You are my mate, chosen by forces greater than either of us, and you will be treated with the honor that position deserves. Always. The declaration should fill me with warmth, but instead I feel panic rising, because I don't know how to be what he needs, how to be a queen, when I've spent my life learning to be invisible. I stand abruptly, pacing toward the windows that overlook the moonlit capital, my hands twisting together anxiously. My reflection stares back at me from the dark glass. A ghost of a girl in servant's clothes, face marked by violence, everything about me screaming inadequacy for the role I've somehow been thrust into. The king approaches slowly, like he's gentling a spooked animal, stopping just behind me close enough that I feel his warmth, but not close enough to trap me. I know this is overwhelming. I know you have no reason to trust me or this situation. But I need you to understand something, Alara. That bond we both felt, that's real. That's sacred. That's the moon goddess herself declaring that you and I are meant to walk this path together. I don't know why she chose you, and I don't need to know. I only need to honor her choice and discover who you truly are beneath the scars and pain others have inflicted. His words chip away at my defenses, making me want to believe despite every lesson learned through suffering. I turn to face him, searching his expression for deception or manipulation, but finding only sincerity in something that might be wonder. This powerful king looks at me like I'm precious, like I'm worth protecting, like I'm something other than the cursed Omega everyone else sees. It's intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Before I can respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupts the moment. The king's expression shudders immediately, authority sliding back into place as he calls permission to enter. The door opens to reveal an older woman in formal attire, her expression carefully neutral, though I see curiosity burning in her eyes as they sweep over me. Your Majesty, the council has requested an emergency session regarding tonight's events. They await your presence in the throne room. The king's jaw tightens, displeasure evident even through his controlled expression. He glances at me, then back to the woman, clearly calculating how to handle this situation. Tell the council I will meet with them in 1 hour. That gives them time to compose themselves and remember who rules this kingdom. The woman bows and withdraws, leaving us alone again. The king turns to me with something like regret in his eyes. I need to deal with this immediately. Establish firmly that questioning the mate bond is not acceptable. But I don't want you going back to the servants' quarters or anywhere you might be vulnerable to retaliation. These rooms are mine, and by extension yours now. No one enters without permission. Will you wait here for me? The request is phrased as a question, but I understand it's really about safety, about keeping me protected while he handles the political fallout of claiming a scarred servant as his queen. I nod agreement, because I have nowhere else to go. No other shelter that would be safer than the king's personal quarters. He looks relieved, then hesitant, like he wants to do something but isn't sure if it's welcome. Finally, he reaches out slowly, giving me time to refuse. And when I don't move away, he cups my face in both hands with a gentleness that makes my chest ache. I know you don't believe it yet, but you are exactly where you belong. The moon goddess doesn't make mistakes, Alara. She gave you to me, and I promise you I will spend every day proving worthy of that gift. Then he does something completely unexpected. He leans down and presses his forehead to mine, a gesture of intimacy and trust among wolves that means more than any kiss could. I feel the mate bond pulse between us, warm and electric and right in ways I have no words for. When he finally pulls away, I see determination in his expression, see a male ready to go to war for what's his. He leaves with final instructions to the guards outside that no one is to disturb me for any reason. And then I'm alone in the king's quarters trying to process how my entire existence has been upended in less than an hour. I sink back onto the sofa, my body finally registering the exhaustion and shock it's been holding at bay. The room around me is overwhelming in its luxury, so far removed from the storage shed corner I've called home that it feels like a different world entirely. I must fall asleep at some point because I wake to voices outside the door, raised in anger though the words are muffled through thick wood. I recognize the king's voice, cold and commanding, and several others I don't know, all speaking over each other in what sounds like a heated argument. Against my better judgment, I move closer to the door, pressing my ear against it to hear more clearly. The king is speaking. Now, his tone allowing no argument. The mate bond is absolute. Your personal feelings about my queen's origins or appearance are irrelevant. She is under my protection and will be afforded every respect due her position. Anyone who fails to acknowledge this will find themselves removed from court permanently. Another voice, older and dripping with disdain, responds. Your Majesty must consider the political implications. The nobles will never accept a servant as queen, especially one who is so obviously damaged. This could destabilize your entire reign, could spark rebellion among those who see it as weakness or madness. The king's response comes swift and sharp as a blade. Then let them rebel. I will crush any who rise against me, just as I crushed the coup that murdered my family. My mate is not negotiable. My throne is not threatened by accepting the moon goddess's choice. If the nobles cannot adapt to this reality, they are welcome to test my resolve and discover firsthand what happens to those who challenge my authority. The absolute conviction in his words makes something warm unfurl in my chest, but it's tempered by the fear that he's risking everything for someone he barely knows. The argument continues for several more minutes, the king systematically shutting down every objection with cold logic and barely veiled threats. Finally, I hear footsteps retreating and the door opens, revealing the king looking tired and frustrated, but not defeated. His expression softens when he sees me, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he closes the door behind him. You heard. It's not a question. I nod anyway, wrapping my arms around myself defensively. He approaches slowly, stopping just outside my personal space. I meant every word. I know this is happening fast. I know you have no reason to trust me yet. But I need you to understand that I will not allow anyone to harm you or make you feel less than you are. The council will fall in line or they will be replaced. It's that simple. The matter-of-fact way he discusses potentially replacing his entire advisory council because they object to me is both thrilling and terrifying. I want to protest, to tell him I'm not worth this kind of upheaval. But the words stick in my throat because part of me, the part that's been starving for value and recognition my entire life, desperately wants to believe him. Instead, I ask the question that's been nagging at me since the bond formed. Why are you so certain? You don't know me. I could be terrible. I could be exactly what they say, cursed and damaged and completely unsuitable to be anyone's mate, let alone a queen. He considers my words seriously, not dismissing them as foolish or self-deprecating. And when he responds, I hear truth that resonates in my bones. I know what it's like to be judged by scars others can't see. I know what it's like to be shaped by trauma and violence into something you never wanted to become. I know what it's like to wear masks so complete that you forget what your real face looks like underneath. When I saw you tonight, when our bond formed, I didn't just feel the mate connection. I recognized you. Not your history or your name, but your essence. You're a survivor who learned to endure impossible circumstances. So am I. Maybe that's why the moon goddess chose us for each other, because we understand what it costs to keep breathing when everything inside you wants to stop. The raw honesty in his words cracks something open inside me, some wall I've built to protect myself from hope and disappointment. Tears burn behind my eyes, but I refuse to let them fall. Not wanting to appear weak in front of this male who seems to see strength where everyone else sees only damage. He must notice anyway, because he closes the distance between us and pulls me into an embrace that's both gentle and unbreakable. I stiffen initially, unused to being touched without violence or contempt, but gradually I relax into his hold, letting myself take comfort from his warmth and solid presence. We stand like that for a long time, two damaged souls clinging to each other in the darkness, the mate bond humming between us like a promise that maybe, just maybe, survival can turn into something that resembles living. If you're invested in Alara and Kaylin's journey, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to follow every twist and turn of this incredible transformation from servant to queen. Drop a comment sharing your thoughts, because I love hearing from you all. The next morning arrives too quickly. Sunlight streaming through the massive windows and pulling me from the first peaceful sleep I've had in years. For a moment I forget where I am. Expect to wake in my corner of the storage shed with aching muscles and fresh bruises. Instead, I'm in a bed so soft it feels like floating, wrapped in blankets that probably cost more than entire wardrobes, in rooms that belong to a king who claims I'm his mate. The memory of last night crashes over me, and I sit up abruptly, looking around the unfamiliar space. The king is nowhere to be seen, but there's a note on the bedside table in strong, angular handwriting. It informs me that he has morning duties to attend, but that someone will arrive shortly to help me prepare for the day, and that I'm to make myself comfortable in his quarters until he returns. The idea of making myself comfortable in these surroundings is laughable, but before I can spiral too far into anxiety, there's a soft knock at the door. The woman who enters is older, perhaps 50, with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that immediately eases some of my tension. She introduces herself as Mira, head of the palace household staff, and explains that the king has assigned her to assist me with anything I might need. Her tone is respectful without being obsequious, and more importantly, she doesn't stare at my scars or treat me like something diseased. She's brought breakfast on a tray, actual food that's fresh and abundant rather than the scraps I'm accustomed to surviving on, and a selection of dresses in various styles for me to choose from. I stare at the offerings in bewilderment, having no idea where to even begin. And Mira seems to understand my overwhelm because she gently guides me through the process of bathing, dressing, and making myself presentable for court. The experience is surreal, being treated with care and consideration, having my opinions on clothing and comfort actually matter to someone. When I'm finally dressed in a simple but elegant gown of deep green that Mira insists brings out my eyes, she guides me to a mirror. I barely recognize the girl staring back. Clean and properly dressed, my hair styled instead of tangled. I look almost normal despite the scars that still mark my face. Mira stands behind me, meeting my eyes in the reflection. You're stronger than you know, child. The king sees it, even if you don't. Yet, give yourself time to grow into this new life. Her words are kind, but I can't quite believe them. Can't shake the feeling that this is all some elaborate mistake that will be corrected soon enough. Before I can respond, the king enters without knocking, his presence immediately dominating the space. His eyes find me, and something fierce and possessive flashes across his face as he takes in my transformation. He dismisses Mira with a nod of thanks, then approaches me slowly, like he's afraid I might bolt. When he reaches me, his hand comes up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his fingers. Beautiful. Though you were beautiful before too, hidden under dirt and exhaustion. The compliment makes me uncomfortable, unused to being seen as anything positive, and he seems to sense this because he changes the subject smoothly. I need to attend court sessions today, handle the normal business of ruling. You're welcome to stay here and rest, or, if you're willing, I'd like you to join me. Let the nobles see us together. Start getting them accustomed to reality, but I won't force you into that spotlight if you're not ready. The option to hide is tempting. To delay the inevitable confrontation with nobles, who will despise my elevation. But I think about the king standing alone last night, defending me to his council, risking political stability for a bond he barely understands. If he can be brave enough to claim me publicly despite the consequences, I can be brave enough to stand beside him. I nod acceptance and see relief and pride war in his expression. He offers his arm formally and I take it, letting him guide me from his quarters toward whatever awaits in the throne room. The walk through the palace is an education in hostile stares and whispered conversations that cut off abruptly as we pass. Servants press themselves against walls to avoid proximity. Nobles sneer with barely concealed contempt. And I feel every eye, cataloging my scars and finding me wanting. The throne room is even more impressive than the ballroom, all soaring architecture and intimidating grandeur designed to remind everyone of the king's absolute authority. The throne itself sits on a raised dais, carved from black stone and inlaid with silver in patterns that seem to shift in the light. A smaller throne has been placed beside it overnight, clearly meant for me, and the sight makes my stomach clench with anxiety. The king guides me to it with steady confidence, waiting until I'm seated before taking his own place, his hand finding mine where it rests on the throne's arm. The gesture is possessive and protective simultaneously, a clear message to everyone watching. The court session proceeds with various petitions and disputes brought before the king for judgment, and I watch in fascination as he dispenses justice with a combination of cold logic and surprising mercy. He's fair, but firm, showing no favoritism, but also no unnecessary cruelty. And I begin to understand that the reputation for ruthlessness comes not from sadism, but from absolute unwillingness to tolerate threats to his kingdom or people. The session continues for hours, nobles presenting cases ranging from border disputes to trade agreements to criminal matters requiring royal decree. Through it all, the king's hand remains clasped with mine, a constant anchor keeping me grounded as I navigate this overwhelming new reality. Several times I catch nobles staring at our joined hands with expressions ranging from confusion to calculation to outright hostility. During a brief recess, an older alpha approaches the dais, his expression carefully neutral, though I see anger burning in his eyes. He bows with precise correctness before speaking. "Your Majesty, I must express concern on behalf of several noble families regarding the recent developments with your mate selection. While we all respect the mate bond's sacred nature, surely you understand that a queen requires certain qualities and training that a servant simply cannot possess. Perhaps a regency period during which the young woman could be properly educated before assuming the full duties of her position." The king's expression doesn't change, but I feel his hand tighten almost imperceptibly around mine. Feel the surge of barely controlled rage through our bond. When he speaks, his voice is dangerously soft. "Lord Aldrich, I appreciate your concern, misguided though it is. My queen does not need to be educated in how to perform a role, as though she's learning lines for a play. She is already queen by virtue of the mate bond. What she may need is time to adjust to her new circumstances, but that adjustment will happen with her in position, not hidden away being molded into someone's idea of acceptability. Your queen has survived circumstances that would have broken most wolves, including you. That survival has given her strengths you cannot recognize because you've never had to develop them. She will learn what she needs to learn, and she will do so as my acknowledged mate and partner. Is that clear?" The alpha's face flushes with anger and embarrassment at being publicly corrected, but he bows stiffly and retreats without further argument. The king turns to me, his expression softening. "I meant that. Every word. You don't need to become someone else to be worthy of this position. You just need to be yourself and discover who that self is when not being crushed under other people's cruelty." His faith in me is touching, but also terrifying because I have no idea who I am, beyond the role of victim and servant I've played for so long. The rest of the day passes in a blur of formal proceedings and hostile stares, and by the time the session finally concludes, I'm exhausted in ways that have nothing to do with physical labor. The king dismisses the court and leads me back toward his quarters, his hand steady on my lower back as we navigate hostile territory together. Once we're safely behind closed doors, he exhales heavily, some of the rigid control leaving his posture. That went better than I expected, honestly. No one challenged me directly beyond Aldrich's passive aggression. Give them time to adjust, and most will fall in line out of self-preservation, if nothing else. I want to believe him, but I can't shake the feeling that the danger is just beginning, that accepting me as queen threatens too many established hierarchies for people to simply adapt peacefully. As if reading my thoughts, the king turns to face me fully, his hands coming up to frame my face with surprising gentleness. "I know you're afraid. I know this seems impossible, but I need you to trust me, Alara. I've fought wars and crushed rebellions. I've rebuilt a kingdom from the ashes of civil war. I can handle some disgruntled nobles who don't like my choice of mate. What I can't handle is you giving up before we've even begun. Can you do that? Can you trust me long enough to see where this path leads?" The vulnerability in his question, the fact that this powerful king is asking rather than commanding, breaks through my remaining resistance. I nod slowly, committing to trust, even though every instinct screams at me to protect myself from inevitable disappointment. He seems to understand what that agreement costs me because he pulls me into an embrace that feels less like possession and more like partnership. We stand like that until the sun sets beyond the windows, two scarred souls choosing to believe that maybe the moon goddess knows what she's doing after all. That maybe broken things can fit together in ways that create something stronger than either piece alone. The thought is terrifying and hopeful in equal measure, and I cling to it like the lifeline it might become. The following weeks establish a pattern that slowly becomes routine, despite its strangeness. I wake in the king's quarters, though he insists I take the bed, while he sleeps on the sofa, citing propriety and not wanting to pressure me into intimacy I'm not ready for. The gesture is thoughtful, but also frustrating, because the mate bond makes me hyper-aware of his presence always, makes me crave proximity. I have no experience navigating. Mira arrives each morning to help me prepare for the day, and her steady kindness gradually chips away at my expectation of cruelty from those around me. I attend court sessions daily, learning through observation how the kingdom functions, how justice is dispensed, how power flows through channels both official and hidden. The king includes me in decisions when appropriate, asking my opinion and actually listening to my responses even when they're hesitant and uncertain. He's teaching me, I realize, showing me how to be queen not through lectures but through example and patient inclusion. The nobles remain hostile but carefully so, unwilling to directly challenge the king's authority but making their displeasure known through subtle slights and exclusions. I'm not invited to the ladies' teas where noble women gather to gossip and scheme. Guards are slow to acknowledge my presence or follow my requests. Servants who should answer to me continue deferring to others, treating me more like an interloper than their queen. The king notices every slight and addresses them systematically, replacing guards who show disrespect and making clear that disobedience to me is disobedience to him. It's exhausting being the center of so much resentment. But gradually, I start to develop a thicker skin, start to realize that their opinion of me matters less than my own slowly rebuilding sense of self-worth. The king helps with this, finding moments throughout each day to remind me that I belong, that I'm valued, that their rejection says more about their limitations than my inadequacy. One afternoon, the king surprises me by canceling his usual meetings and leading me down to the palace archives, a massive library housing centuries of kingdom records and histories. He guides me to a section dedicated to pack lineages and laws, pulling several ancient texts from the shelves. I've been researching your family name and the attack that killed your parents. There are things about that night that don't add up, questions that were never properly answered. He spreads the documents across a reading table, pointing to entries marked with my family name. I lean closer, my heart pounding, because I've never seen official records of my parents, never knew anything beyond vague memories and the pack's insistence that we were nobodies worth forgetting. The king traces one entry with his finger. Your father was Aldous Mooncrest, and your mother was Sarah Mooncrest. According to these records, they weren't just ordinary pack members. They were from the Lunar Healer bloodline, one of the oldest and most powerful lineages in our history. The name means nothing to me, but the king's expression suggests it should, so I wait for him to continue. He pulls another book from the stack, this one older and more fragile, opening to a page marked with detailed illustrations of wolves bearing distinctive markings. Lunar healers were wolves blessed by the moon goddess with the ability to cure injuries and illnesses that would kill normal wolves. They could purify corruption, break curses, even extend life in some cases. The bloodline was systematically hunted to extinction about 50 years ago, during what was officially called a plague, but which some historians believe was actually an organized purge by those who feared their power. He looks at me intently, letting the implications sink in. If my parents were from this bloodline, if I potentially carry that same gift, then the attack that killed them and scarred me takes on entirely different meaning. It wasn't random violence but targeted assassination, and my survival was either an oversight or impossible to complete. The king continues, his voice gentle despite the terrible truths he's revealing. I think your scars aren't just physical wounds. I think they're the result of a sealing ritual. Something designed to lock away your inherited abilities so completely you'd never know they existed. Whoever attacked your family that night wasn't just trying to kill you. They were trying to make sure the lunar healer bloodline stayed extinct. The revelation is too massive to fully process, reframing my entire understanding of identity and history. If he's right, then I'm not cursed. I'm caged. My own body turned into a prison for abilities that could threaten those who benefit from suffering and corruption. The king watches me carefully, gauging my reaction, ready to catch me if this truth proves too heavy to carry. I force myself to breathe, to think, to ask the question that matters most. Can it be undone? The sealing? His expression turns grim. I don't know. Sealing rituals of that power are complex and dangerous to reverse. But I have people researching it. Old records and forgotten texts that might contain answers. If there's a way to restore what was taken from you, we'll find it. The promise is absolute, and I feel something shift inside me. Some small spark of anger igniting where before there was only resignation. If my parents were murdered to suppress their bloodline, if I was deliberately crippled to prevent me from becoming what I was born to be, then surviving isn't enough anymore. I want justice. I want to understand what was stolen from me. I want those responsible to face consequences for what they've done. The king must see the change in my expression, because satisfaction flashes through his eyes, like he's been waiting for me to get angry instead of scared. There she is. There's the queen I knew was hiding under all that learned helplessness. Hold on to that fire, Elara. You're going to need it for what comes next. What comes next arrives sooner than expected. 3. Days after the archive revelation, I'm walking through the palace gardens with Mira, enjoying rare sunshine and momentary peace, when 3 wolves step into our path. I recognize them as nobles from court sessions, mid-ranking alphas who've made no secret of their disdain for my elevation. The largest one, a brutish male named Gareth, sneers at me with undisguised contempt. The king's little charity case wandering around like she belongs here. Tell me, servant, does it hurt knowing everyone sees exactly what you are? Damaged goods parading around in stolen finery? Mira steps forward protectively, but I put a hand on her arm, stopping her intervention. The old me would have cowered and fled, accepted the abuse as deserved. But something has changed in the weeks since the mate bond formed, some core of self-worth slowly rebuilding despite opposition. I meet Gareth's eyes directly, channeling the king's unwavering confidence even though my heart pounds with fear. I am the king's mate, chosen by the moon goddess and acknowledged before the entire court. Your opinion of my worthiness is irrelevant and unwelcome. I suggest you remember that before you continue disrespecting your queen. The words come out stronger than I feel, but the effect is immediate. Gareth's face flushes with rage at being challenged by someone he sees as beneath him. He takes a threatening step forward and I see violence in his eyes. See him calculating whether he can get away with putting me in my place physically. Before he can act, a commanding voice cuts through the tension like a blade. I believe my queen gave you clear instructions. Are you planning to disobey? The king materializes from seemingly nowhere, his presence instantly dominating the space. Gareth and his companions drop into instinctive submission postures, their earlier bravado evaporating. The king moves to stand beside me, his hand finding the small of my back, his eyes never leaving the 3 alphas. When he speaks, again his voice is dangerously soft. You 3 have a choice. You can acknowledge and respect my mate's position immediately and without reservation, or you can be removed from court permanently and return to whatever backwater territories spawned you. Choose now. The threat is clear and absolute. Gareth looks like he wants to argue, but self-preservation wins over pride. He drops into a formal bow, his companions following suit, and mutters an apology that's clearly insincere but technically acceptable. The king dismisses them with a sharp gesture, and they retreat quickly. Once we're alone, he turns to me, and I expect anger that I put myself at risk, or disappointment that I couldn't handle the situation alone. Instead, I see pride and satisfaction in his expression. You stood up for yourself, faced down 3 alphas who would have made you grovel a month ago. Do you understand how significant that is? I hadn't thought about it like that. Too focused on the fear and adrenaline of the confrontation. But hearing him frame it as growth rather than recklessness makes something warm bloom in my chest. Maybe I am becoming someone new, someone stronger than the broken servant who stumbled into the selection ceremony expecting nothing. The king pulls me into his arms, right there in the garden, regardless of who might see, and presses a kiss to my forehead that feels like a blessing and a promise simultaneously. Are you feeling Alara's transformation? Hit that like button if you're rooting for her to discover her true power, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible journey. Comment below with your predictions for what happens next. The breakthrough comes 6 weeks after the mate bond formed. The king's researchers finally uncover a text describing the ritual used to seal lunar healer abilities, and more importantly, the process to potentially reverse it. The king summons me to his private study, and the expression on his face tells me this is significant before he says a word. He's surrounded by ancient books and scrolls, some so old they're barely legible, and in the center of it all is a specific passage marked with careful attention. He guides me to read it, his presence steady and reassuring as I struggle through the archaic language. The reversal ritual is complex and potentially dangerous, requiring specific moon phases, rare ingredients, and most critically, the subject's willing participation and emotional readiness. Forcing it, or attempting it when the person isn't ready, could kill them outright or drive them mad. The king waits for me to finish reading before speaking. The next appropriate moon phase is in 3 days. If you want to try this, if you want the chance to reclaim what was stolen, we can attempt it. But I need you to understand the risks. This could fail. You could be hurt. Things might not change at all. I won't push you toward this decision, but I also won't deny you the choice if you want it. I consider his words carefully, weighing fear against possibility, safety against justice. The truth is, I've been feeling something building inside me ever since I learned about my parents' true identity. A restlessness that might be suppressed power trying to break free, or might just be desperate hope. But I think about the king standing beside me through every challenge, about Mira's kindness, about the small ways I've been growing stronger daily. I think about my parents being murdered for their bloodline, and me being mutilated to ensure that bloodline died with them. The anger that ignited in the archives burns brighter now, fueled by grief and righteous fury at injustice that went unanswered for over a decade. I meet the king's eyes and see him ready to support whatever I decide. I want to try. I want to know who I could have been, who I might still become, and I want those responsible to see that they failed, that the bloodline they tried to extinguish is still burning. Determination and pride flash through the king's expression, and he pulls me close, his hand cradling the back of my head. Then we'll try, together. I'll be with you through every moment, and if it becomes too much, we stop immediately. Your safety matters more than any power you might unlock. The next 3 days pass in a blur of preparation. The king's most trusted advisors gather the materials needed for the ritual while keeping the entire operation secret from the broader court. The fewer people who know about this attempt, the better, both for my protection and to prevent sabotage from those who would benefit from my continued powerlessness. I spend the time in meditation and reflection, trying to prepare mentally for what might come. The king stays close throughout, a steady presence that helps anchor me when anxiety threatens to overwhelm. The night before the ritual, he finds me standing at the windows of his quarters, staring out at the moon that will witness tomorrow's attempt. He joins me silently, his warmth a comfort against the night's chill. Are you frightened? His question is gentle, offering space for honesty without judgment. I consider how to answer, sorting through the tangle of emotions currently churning inside me. Terrified, but also angry, and determined, and ready to stop being a victim of things that happened when I was too young to fight back. Does that make sense? He turns me to face him, his hands framing my face, with the gentleness that still surprises me after weeks of experiencing it. Perfect sense. Fear doesn't mean weakness. It means you understand the stakes, but you're choosing courage anyway, choosing to fight for yourself when it would be easier to accept the limitations others imposed. That's what makes you queen material, Alara. Not the bloodline or the mate bond, but the strength to keep standing up when everything tells you to stay down. His faith in me is humbling and empowering. Simultaneously, I lean into his touch, drawing comfort from his solid presence, and the mate bond that's grown stronger daily even without physical completion of the relationship. We've been careful with each other, the king respecting my need for time and space to adjust. But moments like this make me ache for closeness I've never experienced. As if sensing my thoughts, his expression shifts, heat flickering in his silver eyes before control reasserts itself. After tomorrow, regardless of outcome, I think we should talk about formally completing the mate bond. I've been patient because I wanted you to feel safe, to know that my claim wasn't about possession or power, but the bond is pulling at both of us now. And I think we're ready if you are. The suggestion makes my pulse quicken, desire and nervousness warring for dominance. The idea of being that vulnerable with anyone still frightens me, but with the king it feels less like threat and more like inevitability, like walking toward something I was always meant to reach. I nod slowly and see satisfaction blaze in his expression before he reins it in. Tomorrow, then. We'll do the ritual, see what happens, and then we'll talk about next steps. Together. The word together has become our anchor, a promise that neither of us faces anything alone anymore. We spend the rest of the night in comfortable silence, finding peace in each other's presence while the moon tracks across the sky toward whatever fate awaits. Morning comes too quickly, pale light filtering through windows and pulling me from restless sleep. The king is already awake, dressed and ready, his expression focused and determined. Mira arrives to help me prepare, dressing me in simple white robes, appropriate for the ritual while saying nothing about what's about to happen. Her steady presence is calming, a reminder that I have people in my corner now beyond just the king. The ritual will take place in the palace's oldest chapel, a space rarely used, but still maintained for its historical and spiritual significance. When we arrive, I find a small group already assembled. The king's most trusted advisors, a healer who specializes in ancient magic, and 2 guards to ensure privacy. The chapel itself is beautiful in its simplicity, all stone and stained glass depicting phases of the moon. At the center of the space, a complex pattern has been drawn in silver powder, symbols I don't recognize but which make my skin prickle with latent energy. The healer, an elderly woman named Cassia, explains the process in a calm voice. I'll stand at the pattern's center while she performs the ritual, calling on the moon goddess to break the seals placed years ago. The king will maintain a connection with me throughout, serving as an anchor if things become overwhelming. It could take hours or it could be instantaneous. There's no way to predict how my body will respond to freed power. I take my position in the pattern's center, my heart pounding hard. Enough I'm sure everyone can hear it. The king stands just outside the circle, his eyes locked on mine, his presence a lifeline I cling to mentally. Cassia begins chanting in an ancient language, her words rising and falling in rhythms that seem to resonate with the moonlight streaming through the stained glass. I feel the moment the ritual takes hold, power beginning to build around me like gathering storm clouds. The scars on my skin start to burn, not painful exactly, but intense, like fire, racing along old wounds and setting them ablaze. I gasp, and the king takes a step forward, but Cassia shakes her head sharply, indicating he needs to hold position. The burning intensifies, spreading from my face and arms to encompass my entire body. I feel something inside me straining against invisible chains, power that's been caged for years suddenly aware it has a chance at freedom. The pain escalates from uncomfortable to agonizing, and I cry out involuntarily. The king's face reflects my suffering, his hands clenched at his sides as he fights the instinct to intervene. Through the pain, I feel the mate bond pulsing, his strength flowing into me, his absolute conviction that I can survive this bolstering my own flagging determination. Cassia's chanting reaches a crescendo and something inside me breaks. Not breaks like shattering, but breaks like chains snapping. like prison doors blown open by force too powerful to contain. Power floods through me in a rush that makes me scream, raw and overwhelming and completely different from anything I've experienced. My vision whites out, and I feel myself falling. But before I hit the ground, strong arms catch me. The king, ignoring protocol and potential ritual disruption, gathers me against his chest and holds on while power continues to surge through my system, finding equilibrium. When awareness returns, I'm lying on a bench with the king kneeling beside me, his hand clasped in mine, his expression tight with worry. Cassia hovers, nearby looking exhausted but satisfied. I try to sit up, and the king helps me, supporting my weight when my muscles refuse to cooperate properly. Everything feels different, sharper, and more vivid. Like I've been seeing the world through fog, and it's suddenly cleared. I look down at my hands and gasp, because the scars that covered them are glowing, faint silver light pulsing beneath the damaged tissue. Cassia follows my gaze and nods with satisfaction. The ritual worked. Your abilities are awakening, though it will take time for you to learn control. The scars remain because they're part of your history, but they're no longer suppressing your power. Instead, they're channels for it, marks of survival that have been transformed into sources of strength. I look up at the king and see awe in his expression as he takes in the changes. My scars are indeed glowing faintly, the silver light beautiful despite the damaged tissue it illuminates. I can feel power humming through my entire body now, wild and untamed but undeniably present. The king helps me stand, keeping a supportive arm around my waist as I test my balance. I feel simultaneously exhausted and energized, drained by the ritual, but buzzing with new potential. Cassia approaches with a healing tonic that she insists I drink, explaining that my body needs time to adjust to the sudden influx of accessible power. The king dismisses everyone else, wanting privacy for us to process what just happened. Once we're alone, he turns to me with an expression mixing pride and wonder and possessive satisfaction. How do you feel? It's such a simple question, but I don't have simple answers. I feel reborn. I feel angry at years of stolen potential. I feel powerful in ways I'm only beginning to understand. I feel grateful to the king for believing in possibilities everyone else denied. I feel determined to master these abilities and use them to ensure no one else suffers as I have. I tell him all of this in a rush of words, and he listens intently before pulling me into an embrace that feels like coming home. You're magnificent. You were always magnificent. But now the world can't deny it anymore. Now they have to see what I've seen all along. His words settle something inside me, some last vestige of doubt about my worth finally dissolving. We stay in the chapel for a long time, holding each other while power settles into my system and moonlight paints patterns across ancient stone. Eventually, we make our way back to his quarters, exhaustion from the ritual finally overwhelming everything else. The king helps me into bed despite my protests that I can manage, his hands gentle as he removes my shoes and tucks blankets around me. He moves to leave, but I catch his wrist, surprising both of us. Stay, please. I don't want to be alone right now. Something fierce and tender crosses his expression, and he nods, climbing into bed beside me fully clothed, pulling me against his chest and holding on like I'm precious. The mate bond sings with contentment at our proximity, and for the first time since it formed, I let myself acknowledge how much I've been craving this closeness. I fall asleep to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat and the warmth of his arms around me, safe and valued and whole in ways I never imagined possible. Tomorrow will bring challenges and questions about what my awakened powers mean for the kingdom and for those who tried to destroy my bloodline. But tonight I simply exist, in this moment of peace, wrapped in my mate's embrace and filled with potential that can no longer be denied or suppressed. Morning brings a visitor I'm not expecting. I wake to find the king already up and in discussion with someone whose voice I don't recognize. When I emerge from the bedroom, I find an older alpha with scars of his own, his expression grave as he speaks quietly with the king. They both turn when I enter, and the stranger's eyes widen as he takes in my glowing scars, recognition, and shock warring in his expression. The king gestures for me to join them. Ilara, this is Commander Thane, head of my intelligence network. He's been investigating the attack on your family based on what we discovered in the archives. He has information you need to hear. My stomach clenches, because I know from the king's tone that whatever comes next will be significant and probably painful. Commander Thane bows respectfully before speaking. Your Majesty, I've uncovered evidence that the attack on your parents wasn't carried out by rogues as officially recorded. It was sanctioned by members of the former council, wolves who believed lunar healers were too powerful to exist without threatening established hierarchies. Your parents were specifically targeted because your mother was pregnant with you, because you represented the potential continuation of their bloodline. The attack was meant to eliminate the entire family, but you survived against all odds. He pauses, letting me absorb this confirmation of what we suspected. Then he continues with information that makes my blood run cold. Some of the wolves responsible are still alive and in positions of power. Lord Aldrich, who approached you in court weeks ago, was one of the conspiracy's key orchestrators. So were Beta Marcus from your old pack and several other nobles currently serving at court. They've been watching you since the mate bond formed, trying to determine if your abilities somehow survived the sealing. Ritual. Last night's ritual will have confirmed their fears. The king's expression is absolutely murderous, rage barely controlled beneath his diplomatic mask. His hand finds mine and squeezes almost too hard, grounding himself against the urge to immediately execute everyone involved. He looks at Commander Thane with cold focus. You have proof? Ironclad evidence that will hold up under scrutiny? The commander nods grimly. Documents, witness testimonies from those willing to turn on their co-conspirators for immunity, financial records showing payments to the mercenaries who carried out the attack. Everything needed to bring charges and secure convictions. The king nods once. Decision made. Arrest them. All of them. Every wolf who had any knowledge of or involvement in the murder of Alara's parents and the attempted murder of a child. Bring them to the dungeons and ensure they're held securely. We'll conduct trials publicly, so everyone understands that such actions against royal bloodlines, against children, against the moon goddesses chosen, will not be tolerated or forgotten. Commander Thane bows and departs to execute his orders. The moment we're alone, the king turns to me, his hands framing my face as he searches my expression. I'm sorry. I know this is overwhelming, but they need to face justice for what they did, and you deserve to see them held accountable. I nod because he's right, even though part of me is terrified of confronting the wolves who destroyed my family and shaped my life into the nightmare it became. The king seems to sense my fear because he pulls me close, his voice fierce against my hair. You don't have to see them if you don't want to. You don't have to testify or confront them or have anything to do with the trials. Just give the word, and I'll handle everything while you stay safely away from it all. The offer is tempting, but I shake my head against his chest. These wolves stole my childhood, my parents, my sense of safety and worth. They tried to erase an entire bloodline because they feared power they couldn't control. I won't hide from them now when I finally have the means to ensure they can never hurt anyone else. I pull back enough to meet the king's eyes and see understanding in his expression. I want to be there. I want them to see what they failed to destroy. I want to look them in the eyes while they're held accountable. Pride and grim satisfaction flash across the king's face, and he nods. Acceptance of my decision. The next few hours pass in a blur of activity as the palace erupts into chaos. The arrest of multiple high-ranking nobles simultaneously sends shockwaves through the court, speculation running rampant about what crime could warrant such dramatic action. The king calls an emergency court session for late afternoon, mandating attendance from all nobles currently in residence. I spend the time preparing mentally with Mira's help, dressing in formal attire that includes a crown the king had commissioned for me weeks ago, but which I've never worn. It's beautiful and surprisingly lightweight. Silver and moonstone wrought into patterns that echo the scars now glowing faintly on my skin. When I look in the mirror, I see someone new. Someone who carries trauma but isn't defined by it. Someone with power and purpose beyond mere survival. The court session is the most crowded I've seen. Nobles packing every available space and buzzing with anxious speculation. The king enters with me at his side, and the sight of me wearing the crown, clearly shocks many who thought I was still just a symbolic mate, rather than actual queen. We take our thrones, and the king's expression is colder than I've ever seen as he surveys the assembled wolves. When he speaks, his voice carries absolute authority that makes even the most powerful alphas shift uncomfortably. Many of you have questioned my choice of mate, have made your displeasure at having a scarred Omega as queen abundantly clear despite my repeated warnings that such attitudes are unacceptable. Today you will learn why those scars exist, and you will understand that your queen is not the one who should be questioned. Rather, it is those among you who conspired to destroy her family and bloodline who should fear examination. He gestures and guards bring forward the arrested nobles, Lord Aldrich and Beta Marcus, and several others I recognize from court sessions. They're in chains and look furious and terrified in equal measure. The king continues, laying out the evidence Commander Thane compiled in clear, damning detail. He describes the conspiracy to eliminate lunar healers, the calculated murder of my parents, the sealing ritual performed on me as a child to ensure their bloodline ended. He presents documents and testimonies, financial records and witness accounts, building an unassailable case while the court listens in stunned silence. When he finishes, the accused have no defense to offer, no way to deny the weight of evidence against them. The king's expression is absolutely merciless as he delivers his judgment. For the murder of members of the royal bloodline, for conspiracy to commit genocide against a sacred lineage blessed by the moon goddess herself, for the attempted murder of a child and the suppression of her gifts, I sentence you all to death. The sentence will be carried out at dawn 3 days from now, allowing time for you to make peace with whatever gods might still listen to those who harm children. Take them away. The guards drag the convicted nobles from the throne room as chaos erupts, wolves shouting questions and accusations in all directions. The king rises, and the room falls silent instantly. Let this be absolutely clear to everyone present. My queen is descended from one of our most sacred and powerful bloodlines. She survived an attack meant to extinguish that bloodline permanently. She carries gifts that will benefit this entire kingdom once she learns to wield them properly. Any who continue to show her disrespect or question her worthiness will find themselves joining those scheduled for execution. Am I understood? The assembled nobles respond with a roar of acknowledgement. Whether genuine or motivated by self-preservation, I can't tell and don't particularly care. The king dismisses court and leads me from the throne room, his hand never leaving my back. Once we're in private corridors, he pulls me into an alcove and kisses me for the first time, fierce and claiming and full of barely restrained emotion. When we finally part, we're both breathing hard, the mate bond singing with satisfaction and demand for more. His forehead drops to rest against mine, and his voice is rough when he speaks. I've wanted to do that since the moment our bond formed. You are incredible, Alara. The way you held yourself together during that trial, the strength it took to face them publicly. I have never been more proud to call you my mate and my queen. His words and his kiss have shattered the last of my hesitation about completing the bond fully. I pull back enough to meet his eyes and see desire and restraint warring in his expression. I make my decision. Take me to bed. Complete the bond properly. I'm ready, and I want this. I want you. Something primal and possessive flashes across his face, and he lifts me effortlessly, carrying me through the corridors toward his quarters, while I cling to his shoulders. We burst through his doors, and he kicks them closed behind us, his mouth finding mine again as he carries me to the bedroom. What happens next is intense and overwhelming and perfect. The physical completion of our bond burning away any remaining doubts or fears. When we finally collapse together in the aftermath, I feel fundamentally changed, connected to him in ways that transcend words. The mate bond is complete now, permanent and unbreakable, and I can feel his emotions as clearly as my own. His satisfaction and possessive pride and fierce love wash over me, and I send back my own gratitude and wonder and growing affection that's rapidly becoming something deeper. We spend the next 3 days rarely leaving his quarters, learning each other's bodies and histories, sharing stories and fears and hopes for the future. The king tells me about his own trauma, about watching his family slaughtered in front of him, and having to become ruthless to survive and reclaim his throne. I tell him about years of abuse and invisibility, about learning to be so small the world forgot I existed. We cry together over shared pain and make love with desperate intensity, cementing our bond and building a foundation of trust that will support whatever comes next. On the third morning, we wake early and dress in formal attire, preparing to witness the executions of those who destroyed my family. The king holds my hand as we walk to the execution grounds, his presence a steady anchor against the complex emotions swirling through me. The convicted nobles are brought forward one by one, and as tradition demands, I'm given the right to speak before sentence is carried out. I look at Lord Aldrich and Beta Marcus and the others who stole my childhood and tried to erase my bloodline. I see fear in their eyes now, the arrogance and certainty they carried throughout their lives finally crumbling as they face consequences for their actions. When I speak, my voice is clear and strong, carrying across the assembled witnesses. You tried to destroy something precious because you feared its power. You murdered my parents and scarred me body and soul, and you did it believing you would face no justice for these crimes. You were wrong. The moon goddess doesn't forget her chosen, and she doesn't allow such evil to go unpunished forever. I forgive nothing you've done, but I release you from any further hold on my life or thoughts. Your deaths will close this chapter, and I will move forward, building something better than the world you tried to preserve. The king nods to the executioner, and the sentences are carried out swiftly. I watch without flinching, witnessing justice delivered for crimes that shaped my entire existence. When it's finished, the king leads me away from the grounds, back toward the palace and the life we're building together. That evening we stand on a balcony overlooking the capital, the king's arms wrapped around me from behind, both of us watching moonlight paint the city silver. What happens now? I ask softly. His answer rumbles through his chest against my back. Now we rule. Now we reform the laws that allowed such injustice to persist. Now we ensure no one else suffers what you suffered simply because of their bloodline or rank. Now we discover the full extent of your abilities and figure out how they can benefit the kingdom. Now we build the life the moon goddess intended for us when she bound us together. The future he describes feels possible for the first time, feels real instead of a desperate fantasy. I turn in his arms to face him, seeing my own hope reflected in his silver eyes. Together, his smile is rare and beautiful, transforming his usually stern expression into something softer. Always together. That's what mates do. They face everything as a united front, as partners rather than individuals. You and me against whatever challenges come. I promise you that, Alara. Whatever happens next, you won't face it alone. Ever again. The promise settles into my bones, becoming part of the foundation I'm building for this new life. The scars that once marked me as cursed now glow softly in the moonlight, symbols of survival and power rather than shame. The mate bond pulses between us, strong and unbreakable, tying me to this male who saw value when everyone else saw only damage. I lean up to kiss him, and he meets me halfway. The moment sweet and full of promise for all the tomorrows we'll build together. Have you been crying happy tears? Hit that like button if this story touched your heart, and subscribe so you never miss future stories of transformation and true love conquering all odds. Comment your favorite moment from Alara and Kaylin's journey, because I love hearing from you all. The epilogue to this story comes 6 months later, in the same ballroom where the mate bond first formed. The space has been transformed for tonight's celebration, the anniversary of my official coronation as queen. The nobles who once sneered at my presence now bow with genuine respect, having seen firsthand how my healing abilities have benefited the kingdom and transformed their understanding of what power truly means. I've spent these months learning to wield my gifts under Cassia's patient instruction, discovering I can heal not just physical wounds but emotional trauma, break curses that have plagued families for generations, and purify corruption in both body and soul. The king has used my abilities strategically, offering healing to allies and withholding it from those who refuse to adapt to our reformed society. Together, we've rewritten laws that oppressed Omegas and other vulnerable wolves, established protections for those without power or rank, and created systems to ensure justice flows more fairly through the kingdom. The changes haven't been universally welcomed, but resistance has been minimal once people understood that opposing the queen meant opposing healing for themselves and their families when needed. It's pragmatic rather than idealistic acceptance. But I'll take it, because the outcomes matter more than motivation. I wear the crown easily now, having grown into the role through necessity and determination, and the king's unwavering support. My scars still glow faintly when I use my abilities, a permanent reminder of where I came from and what I survived. But they're beautiful now, symbols of power rather than shame, marks that make wolves bow rather than sneer. The king stands beside me greeting guests, his hand never straying far from my waist, his pride in my accomplishments evident to everyone watching. We've become true partners in every sense, ruling together with combined strengths that make us formidable. Mira appears with champagne and a warm smile, her own status elevated significantly since she's become my most trusted advisor and friend. Commander Thane stops by to report on the complete dismantling of the conspiracy network that tried to extinguish my bloodline, confirming that every last collaborator has been identified and dealt with appropriately. Even wolves from my old pack attend tonight, carefully respectful now that I'm no longer the cursed servant they tormented, but rather their queen, with power over their fortunes. I don't forgive them their past cruelty, but I don't seek revenge either. Indifference is its own form of justice, showing them they matter so little to my current life that hatred would be wasted energy. The king pulls me into a dance as the orchestra begins playing, and we move together with the practiced ease of mates who've learned each other's rhythms intimately. He leans close to whisper in my ear, "Have I told you today that you're magnificent? That watching you transform from terrified servant to confident queen has been the greatest privilege of my life?" I smile up at him, no longer doubting his sincerity or my own worth. You might have mentioned it once or twice, but I never get tired of hearing it. His answering smile is warm and full of promise for the private celebration that will follow tonight's public event. We dance surrounded by our court, by wolves who respect, and some who even genuinely care for us, by a kingdom slowly healing from generations of injustice and oppression. The ballroom where I was once invisible is now mine. The power that was stolen has been reclaimed, and the mate who knelt before me despite social pressure and political risk now holds me close, while moonlight streams through windows that witnessed the beginning of everything. My story didn't end with trauma and scars. It transformed into something greater, something that proves survival can lead to thriving, that broken things can become beautiful, and that the moon goddess truly does have plans beyond our limited understanding. I am Queen Alara, last of the lunar healers, mate to the most powerful alpha in the kingdom, and living proof that destiny sometimes chooses the most unlikely. Heroes specifically, because they've learned strength the easy ones will never comprehend. This is my happily ever after, hard-won and precious and more magnificent than any fantasy I dared dream when I was the scarred girl everyone laughed at, the girl who became queen when the Alpha King bowed before her and changed everything.